Hello, and welcome to this ARA webinar with staff from CPDA, the Council of Producers and Distributors of Agritechnology, titled Adjuvant Advantage for the Sales Agronomist. Today's webinar will focus on drift reduction adjuvants and effective nozzle selection. We'd like to take this time to thank Winfield United for sponsoring today's webinar. My name is Hunter Carpenter, Senior Director of Government Affairs for ARA, and I'll introduce our webinar speakers in just a bit. First, I want to go over a few housekeeping items so you know what to expect. Webinars are an important part of the ARA professional development pathway and provide a great opportunity for ARA member companies to help educate their employees. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to the member-only ARA dashboard section of our website. As a reminder, you can log into that dashboard to access past webinar recordings at any time. If you do not have an ARA login, you can email info@aradc.org to set one up. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation, but you can type them into the chat panel or Q&A function at any time. With that out of the way, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today, Johnny Roberts, Bill Chisholm, and Greg Dahl. Johnny has 45 years of experience in the development and technical support of pesticide, fertilizer, and adjuvant formulation. 44 of those years were spent with Helena Agri Enterprises. Johnny is also the co-inventor of 15 U.S. patents related to pesticide, adjuvant, and nutritional formulations. Bill has over 45 years of experience in agriculture and pest management. He grew up on a vegetable farm in the Salinas Valley of California and worked for the California Extension, a pesticide registrant, retired after 22 years with the EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs. He received his PhD in weed science from Virginia Tech. Greg retired from Winfield United in December of 2023, following 40 years working for both the private and public sectors. He is currently serving as president of the Weed Science Society of America and was president of the North Central Weed Science Society in 2017. He's been a certified crop advisor since 1998 and has over 70 products brought to market from research by Greg and his team. Much of his research involves adjuvants and application technology. We'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge CPDA's advisory working group for all of their input in helping make this such a successful series of webinars for both ARA and CPDA. Following today's presentation, a QR code will be displayed for you to scan from your mobile device and earn 1 IPM continuing education credit as approved for by the certified crop advisors. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Johnny first.
Very good. Thank you, Hunter. And a bit about what our agenda will be today for today's webinar. We're going to start off, Bill giving us a presentation on how drift reduction adjuvants have a place with ESA. We're going to answer the question of why we think so few acres actually get a drift or deposition aid, and try to sort through the confusion between what a drift reduction aid is versus a deposition aid, and how they're important in all applications because deposition at the end of the day is our end goal. We'll also look at some of the certified adjuvant products that are on CPDA sortable label feature. Next slide, please. Bill.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. The ESA is bringing some changes. There's now going to be a regulatory review and use of spray drift adjuvant. So I'd like to bring that in just a minute. The EPA's goal in developing the Endangered Species Act, they wrote up some strategies for herbicides and insecticides. The fungicide is coming. It's primarily to keep the pesticide on the field. Everything we can do, everything you can do to keep the pesticide on the field is important. They developed a set of options for the user to reduce spray drift and runoff and erosion. This is based on the fact that the majority, but not all, threatened and endangered species and their critical habitat are not on agricultural fields. So keeping the pesticide on the field is the best way to protect them. Next slide, please. So I've got a couple examples of DRAs and polyacrylamide. So if you're using a DRA to reduce spray drift, mitigation points can be used or can be provided for that. This is only for herbicides, but we're hoping in the very near future this will start applying to insecticides and fungicides as well. when they looked at the DRAs, they assume you're starting with a high boom greater than 24 inches above the ground for a ground application and that you're using very fine to fine droplet size. If you change from a fine to a medium droplet, you get mitigation points for doing that. And in addition, if you add a DRA to that, you can get a 30% buffer reduction. So it's an additional 30% just for the DRA. If you change from a fine to a coarse or very coarse droplet size, you get a 15% buffer reduction. And just one example, the Liberty Ultra in the supplemental label, you can get no spray drift buffer if you use a DRA, 2.5% for aerial and 0.3% for ground, and a low boom height. So dropping the boom height and going to a DRA can get you a zero spray drift buffer. So there's some real advantages to these. Another thing they have is points for anionic polyacrylamide. It's used in some cases in irrigation water to reduce erosion. It increases the water holding capacity of the soil in addition. You can get 2 runoff and erosion mitigation points for using that in your agricultural system. So again, they're starting to give mitigation points for these products. Next slide, please. So I get asked quite often, will all pesticide labels change? And all of the pesticide labels are being evaluated to protect listed species. Currently, there's only a handful, a little over a dozen pesticides that have been evaluated for listed species. I think it's going to take several years before we see these changes on all labels. And that's really good because if there's only 1 or 2 products that you're currently using that you have to figure this out for, it gives you a chance to figure out how to get mitigation points for spray drift and runoff and erosion. So a gradual introduction, I think, is in all of our benefit. Next slide, please. Where can I find ESA information? There's a number of really good websites. EPA has several, one on the Bulletins Live 2, which shows you where these species can be found and where they need to be protected. There's a mitigation menu at the EPA website. They also have a new one called the Pesticide App for Label Mitigations, PALM. It helps you go through, it asks you a series of questions, and it helps you assign the number of spray drift mitigation points and the number of runoff mitigation points you get for that particular field. There's another good source, the Center for Integrated Pest Management. They have a pesticide environmental stewardship website that has some great information on a wide range of things, not just ESA. And then the Weed Science Society of America has a ESA webpage. We have definitions, handouts, presentations, and that sort of thing. So there's a number of sites out there with information. Next slide, please. Some examples of runoff erosion mitigation options. There's over 40 ways to get points. Many counties have relief points because the agency determined that they had overestimated the potential for runoff and erosion. You get points for conservation tillage, you get points for cover crops, you get points for grassed waterways or filter strips next to the field. You get points if you're doing dry land farming. You get points for tracking mitigation measures. You can reduce the annual application rate and get points. And if you're working with a technical expert in runoff and erosion control, you can get points too. Next slide. Examples of spray drift mitigation options. There's 15 ways to get buffer reductions. You can increase the droplet size. You can add a drift reducing adjuvant. You can lower the boom height. You can reduce the single application rate. You can maintain a downwind windbreak If you have windbreaks around the edge of the field, that can be counted too. So there's 15 ways to reduce spray drift. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to talk about there's some additional sources for information. There's a coordinated plan between CropLife America, CPDA, and the ag retailers, United for Success, and they each have some great information on their websites. Next slide, please. One of the things that I thought was great for them to do is their ESA toolbox. One of the things I'd like to mention is they have a series of short videos on how to adapt to the ESA. They have one on just a mitigation overview, one on Bulletins Live 2, how you figure out if there's endangered species near your farm or on your farm, a video on spray drift, and another on runoff. These are all 6 to 7 minute videos. They're really short. I think they were really well done. On that toolbox, they also have ESA 101 explaining this. They have an ESA flow chart explaining the thought process of how you go about figuring out how to get points. They also have EPA educational resources. Next slide. And then the final thing I'd like to mention, they have a really great ESA technical guide to mitigation options, and that goes through a whole series of options for what you can do to mitigate the impact on endangered species. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Bill. And first, let's get some definitions out of the way. And as always, we will be leveraging our definitions off of the ASTM standard E1519. And first, a deposition aid is simply a material that improves the abilities of sprays to get on targeted surfaces. A drift reduction agent is a material used in liquid spray mixtures to reduce driftable fines. So there's your two core definitions. And then driftable fines, and in this definition, it's an older one, defined at being particles at 100 below 105 microns. That has been changed or will be changed to 150 microns. Next slide, please. So what's the difference? And this is a point of confusion. When is a drift reduction agent a deposition aid? A deposition agent that is capable of reducing spray droplets less than 150 microns may also be considered a drift reduction agent. So again, you can use the terms interchangeably as long as they are able to reduce the formation of driftable fines. Improving deposition really means more of the applied pesticide and the intended target. And at the end of the day, better deposition is just going to equal more dead weeds and bugs and improve disease control. And that's why so much focus is on deposition. So as we've all learned in our previous adjuvant seminars, I mean, pesticides applied in water-based spray carriers have poor deposition properties. And this is due to the tendency of these water-based sprays to bounce off of plant surfaces, they evaporate. There's oftentimes a loss of uniformity because of gravity and compatibility differences. And even after it's been applied, we sometimes have issues where the spray deposit can be washed off due to rain and irrigation. So deposition agents can have a role in preventing or reducing these problems. Next slide. So how do they do this? Well, at the end of the day, what these deposition aids do is that they reduce the spray droplet bounce. That is a problem. They reduce the evaporation issues. And again, this is important in both the spray droplet and in the deposit that remains afterwards. They have the ability to increase spray deposit retention. They can add more uniformity to the crop canopy. And this improves general spray mix uniformity. And Greg will be going into a lot of detail on how this translates into more dead weeds and bugs and less disease. Next slide, please. So with such a positive benefit being possible, why at the end of the day, only 15 to 25% of acres being treated even have a deposition or drift reduction agent? And there's an issue of their perception oftentimes in this day and age where everyone is looking for better economics on their applications. It becomes one, well, why am I after the perfect droplet? I just want to kill more weeds and bugs. Sometimes the growers do not see the value of maximizing the performance of these droplets. Oftentimes, particularly if they're not used correctly, you can have a lot of compatibility and mixing issues. There is a perception that the nozzles themselves can provide the deposition and drift reduction that is needed and that you don't use adjuvants. And again, Greg will be discussing this in detail about how this is not the case. So the thing that we like to stress that none of these limitations apply when the proper drift control deposition agent is used correctly. Next slide, please. So what are these limitations? And they're real, and they have been a big part of why we have had limited use, is that some of these materials do not age well. If they go through the cold, there's a shelf life, and this has gotten much better over the years, particularly with cold weather stability, but always consult the manufacturer if there is a shelf life. Oftentimes, if they get past that shelf life, they either do not work or they make mixing problems appear in the application. Beware that some require different levels of agitation, some much higher than others. There are inherent spray mix compatibilities with some, particularly things like pH and boron. Again, these are things that you can talk and visit with the manufacturer. And then oftentimes these spray droplets are not optimal for the pesticide to work. Oftentimes making very, very large droplets can be counter to what we're trying to do with the specific pesticide. And then with some materials, we have had difficulty in rinsing out containers, and this can add to the aggravation and just the general pushback of why I don't want to use these materials. Next slide, please. So we can broadly put deposition drift reduction agents into two categories. There are the oil emulsions, and these can be, these are systems where we basically emulsify oil and water, though in some occasions we actually invert and have a water emulsified in oil. Many of them are based on paraffin oil, methylated seed oil, lecithin, seed oils themselves. Many are blends. But essentially, what they all have in common, they have some type of oil that is emulsified in their action. So when we get into the polymers, there we have essentially two groups within polymer group, polyacrylamides in the form of a concentrate or polyacrylamides that are already pre-mixed or pre-swelled, ready to use. You have a number of natural gums that can be derived from guar, xanthan gum, starches, and cellulose. Next slide, please. So what are some general do's and don'ts so that we can avoid these mixing problems and utilize these valuable tools? Always follow your product label guidelines. There can be a lot of variations in mixing order. Don't assume anything. Always read those labels first. Generally, it's a very good idea to disperse or dissolve the pesticides and fertilizer mixtures before you add any DRA. Again, refer to the label to be sure, but generally that's true. Some boron has been problematic for some of these materials. Verify compatibility before you use them. Follow any label or manufacturing guidelines regarding pH. And unless directed otherwise, a good general rule is that if it's an oil-based DRA product, they should be added last. And if you're using a polymer-based DRA, follow all the label guidelines regarding mix time, addition order, and or the degree. Again, you can have a lot of variability in this. Don't assume anything. Always check your label. Next slide, please. So these are valuable tools. They can have a dramatic impact. Oftentimes it's quite visual, as you see in this particular slide here. So we'll learn in the next remaining slides of this webinar why we use these materials and where their role is and how do they fit specifically with the nozzles. Next slide. Greg, at this point, we'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about spray nozzles, but we don't want to spend much time here because there's a lot of stuff out there and there's a lot of other people that are experts on this. I just show you this publication you can get from the internet. It's at Purdue Pesticide Programs, and it does a nice job of going through agricultural spray nozzles. And then there's a lot of other information from the people that make spray nozzles, such as TJet and many of the other companies. They do a nice job with information for you. And there's a lot of choices. You want to pick the best nozzle for the job that you're going to be doing. Next slide, please. And so I am going to go through this thing, and this came out of that publication from Purdue. But there's four things that a nozzle does that you need to be aware of and adjust accordingly. And so the first one is it meters the flow of liquid through that nozzle. And so that's how you set rate. That's where you get your gallons per acre of your spray mix. You get your rate per acre of your actives, things like that. So one of the things nozzles do is they set the rate. The next thing they do is they make droplets, and they can make big droplets or little droplets depending on how that nozzle is designed. And so picking the right nozzle is huge for getting the droplet size that you want to have. And then third thing that nozzles do is they create a pattern. You have a spray angle and you create a pattern so you can get good coverage, good deposition. And then the last thing a nozzle does is it keeps energy in the system and it pushes things. It maintains velocity because these big droplets will land, little droplets go wherever the air goes, and the nozzle will help push droplets as far as it can. Those are the four things a nozzle does. And we'll go to the next slide, please. And there's lots of different choices. So we're not going to go into this. Work with your sprayer people, the people you buy equipment from, and ask them questions, get the design. And you can see just of this arrangement of various drop nozzles. They make droplets of different sizes. We've got some that make uh, fine droplets or medium droplets. We've got some that make coarse or very coarse or ultra coarse droplets. And so there's a lot of choices. Next slide, please. And another thing is that spraying has changed. So now we've got where we used to have blanket sprays across everything. We had banded sprays. Now we also have pulsing sprays. We have uh, precision ag sprays that we're going to get um, spray only when the machine detects weeds or and doesn't spray when we don't have weeds there. And so all these things require different nozzles. And so what we're going to do is as you're trying to set up to get a good application, one of the things we want to do is get the right droplet size, and that's best done with the proper nozzle. And then when we've got things where we want them to be, we would then add in a deposition aid, or we would add in a drift reduction adjuvant to finish the job, to kind of fine tune it. And so when we have these ultra low drift nozzles, they can make big droplets. That's great if we're trying to reduce drift, but they may have coverage problems. We may need to have smaller droplets to give us better coverage. And we can do some things with the drift reduction adjuvant to make things better. So start with the nozzle, move to the drift reduction adjuvant. Next slide, please. And then we've got this map here where we're seeing different nozzles, different droplet sizes, things like that. This is some of the information where you pick the best droplet. I mean, pick the best nozzle for your needs, and then we'll add in a drift reduction adjuvant as well. The next slide, please. So we're just starting with with that nozzle, and we got to pick that right nozzle. Then we're going to add the correct deposition aid. The deposition aid can move things around so that we get more of the droplets that we want to get. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we do have that we discovered along the way was that not everything behaves like water. And so we actually complain to people that you can't just test with water. You actually have to test with your actual spray solution, because you can see here, water's kind of in the middle. We have some things that actually reduce the amount of driftable fines. And then we have a lot of things that in fact increase driftable fines. And a couple of these that are very common are fully loaded glyphosates typically have a lot of surfactant and create a lot of fines. And then a lot of our glufosinate, our Liberty type products, they have a lot of adjuvants in there that also create very small droplets. And it's important to actually go off of what you're actually spraying. Next slide, please. So, so we're going to start with the nozzles, and then we're going to go with the drift reduction adjuvants. And so next slide, please. So here's some testing that we did. And we're looking at, there's each of the items is in two columns, a taller dark green and a shorter light green. These are actually different nozzles from various nozzles that create a lot of small droplets to nozzles that create very big droplets. And you can see that gradation all the way from very small, large amounts of very small driftable fines to very low amounts of driftable fines. And the second column is if we add a DRA to that system, what amount of spray volume is going to be made up of driftable fines. And as you can see, going across that whole system of nozzles, that we get about a 50% reduction in the amount of spray volume that is made up of driftable fines. And so pick the right nozzle and then move and pick the right drift reduction adjuvant. Next slide, please. And then this has just showing some things. If we're using ultra coarse sprays, we can get poor coverage. And then we can have problems with canopy penetration as well. And as if you look at this thing, we've got pretty good fair coverage on that first leaf. And then as we move farther down, it doesn't look as good. Next slide, please. So then we have already talked about this. We'll do it again. If we use a glyphosate, so here we've got Roundup WeatherMax, we get more driftable fines than we do with water. And then if we add in a drift reduction adjuvant, you can see the amount of driftable fines has gone down by a large amount. And even with the WeatherMax, with the DRA, it's much less, about half of what we would get without a DRA. And then the other thing I'd like for you to look, if we look at the water and the Roundup WeatherMax, we have about the same droplet speed. And then if we look where we have added in a DRA either by itself or with the glyphosate, it has actually increased the amount of speed of those droplets. So they're going to go farther before they run out of energy, and we're going to get better penetration of the canopy, better deposition farther down. So good thing. Next slide. And then this is a big thing. We've got different droplet sizes here. Typically from herbicides, we're going to be looking at 300 to 800 microns and how much drift we get there. The thing with big droplets is they will land, and they may land where you want, or we may have them move a little bit off target, but that we call that swath displacement. But those droplets are all going to land in the field. And then if we go to little droplets, they lose their energy very quickly, and they go wherever the wind goes, and they can go a long way. And then with the right field conditions, they also can evaporate quite quickly and become dry particles that float in the air and go off someplace, then land, and then they may get re-wet and cause spray drift injury downwind. Next slide. And then this is that story. So big droplets have to land. They're going to land, and they're going to land close to where you spray. Small droplets, they probably are not going to land. They will lose their speed, and then they'll just float in the air and go wherever the air goes. If we got a good day where the air is being lifted up, we're good. We just lost the spray, but it's not going to cause any spray damage. If those droplets are trapped in some way, they're going to move off target, and they're going to probably cause some spray damage downwind, spray drift. Next slide. So should you, a lot of people want to increase their coverage. They want to get good canopy penetration. In the old days, they were told to increase the pressure, and it'll just drive things down into the canopy. And does that work? And the answer is no. Next slide, please. It's a terrible idea, because we just increase our fines. They lose their energy, and they move off target where we don't want them to be. You don't get any canopy penetration by increasing the pressure. That's just not a very good way to do that. Next slide, please. Here's some more things on droplets. And you can see as we move there, I'd like for you to go to the fourth column. How long does it take for those droplets to evaporate? You can see some of those times are very small. You can see the distance, deceleration distance. That's the point where it loses all of its energy. And those very small droplets, they don't even land. They are going to go off with the wind. And so with that, we want droplets to be big enough to land. We don't want these droplets to move off target. Next slide. Okay, plants don't drink rocks. And that sounds dumb, but it's an important way for you to remember this. Plants don't drink rocks. Next slide. So we're going to be dealing with situations, small droplets are going to evaporate. They will have dry particles that remain. They may be floating in the air. Particles that land on the plant but don't get into the plant are going to dry on that leaf surface. That's a bad thing. We need to keep our particles wet in order for them to do what they need to do. Next slide. And here's a use of a deposition aid or a DRA. And we've got, without a DRA, we've got a really good coverage up on the top leaf. But then as we move down that crop canopy, we don't have very good coverage. And so we're not going to get the activity that we're looking for. Whereas if we use a good quality deposition adjuvant, a DRA adjuvant, you can see we actually have less coverage on the top leaf, but we've got plenty of coverage there. And then as you look farther down in the canopy at the ear leaf, and then down below the ear leaf, we've got very good coverage all the way through that canopy. Next slide. And then this is some soybeans. They were sprayed with fluorescent dye. The plant on the left was sprayed without a drift reduction adjuvant. We got good coverage on the top of the plant, but not down below. And then if we sprayed the same thing with a DRA, you can see we got good coverage all the way up and down the canopy. Next slide, please. And then you saw that deposition. Now we're going back to what does that mean? And so what we've really got here is we're looking at corn yield, and there's hundreds of trials, hundreds of comparisons here. And so what we have is the fungicide sprayed alone or the fungicide sprayed with a drift reduction adjuvant. And when we do that, when we use the drift reduction adjuvant with the fungicide, we got a big increase in disease control, and it followed through as higher yields. And then over all of these hundreds of trials, it actually resulted in a 5.7 bushel per acre increase using a DRA along with a fungicide compared to the fungicide alone. Next slide, please. And then this was some wheat that's the same type of thing. The column that is over on the right is the untreated yield. And then if we use the fungicide, we got a yield increase compared to not using a fungicide. And then the left-hand column is a drift reduction adjuvant was added to the fungicide, and you see we got another big increase. And this is almost 4 bushels per acre of a yield increase using the DRA compared to the fungicide alone. Next slide. Here's I just want you to look at the left-hand picture and the right-hand picture here. And what we've got is this is the actual deposition. The left-hand picture is with the fungicide alone. And you can see we got pretty good coverage there. But then if we look at the right-hand picture, it's that same fungicide with a drift reduction adjuvant added to it. And you can see how much more coverage you got with by using a drift reduction adjuvant. Next slide. This is another thing that I put together. This is FlexStar GT. The big bottle on the left is how much FlexStar GT you would put out per acre. That's the use rate. And then we actually made a spray and put it into the wind tunnel. And we measured the amount of driftable fines. And the middle bottle, the liquid that's in there, is the spray volume that would be made up of droplets that are driftable fines. And we're just going to assume that, and they would be lost. And then the bottle on the right contains the amount of spray volume that would be able to be in the size of driftable fines, and it's a lot less. And then if we take and measure the amount between the two volumes there, that is the extra amount of FlexStar GT that you would get by using the drift reduction adjuvant. And so that gets added back in, and we actually then oftentimes see better control and better yields. And so using the drift reduction adjuvant can actually add to your return on investment by giving you better control. Next slide. Here's some more on fungicides. Actually, these go in 2 bars. And the first one is the same fungicide. We want things to be lower because we're looking at driftable fines. And so the first bar is higher. That is the fungicide without the DRA. Second bar is with a DRA, and you can see we have less amount that's driftable fines. That first two bars are a fungicide A. Fungicide B, we have the same pattern. Fungicide C, we have the same pattern. And fungicide D, we have the same pattern. So the drift reduction adjuvant is making each of these fungicides have less driftable fines. Next slide. And then this is just one fungicide, Trivapro, but we're using it with and without DRAs with different nozzles. And so if we're using an XR nozzle, that's going to give us small, relatively small droplets. And we have a pretty high amount of spray volume that's driftable fines. It's reduced if we use a DRA. If we use an AIXR, those make bigger droplets. And even though the direction goes in the right way that the DRA reduces it, we're starting with less volume that's in driftable fines. And then if we look at a TTI, that's kind of in the middle. And again, it goes the same way. If we use a DRA, it's slightly less than it would be if we don't have a DRA. Next slide, please. This is a repeat of the slide you saw earlier. But again, these are all different nozzles, all the way from fairly fine droplet size nozzles to very large droplet size nozzles. And again, showing you the dark green bars are the Roundup mixture without any DRA. And then the light green bars are that mixture with a DRA, and you can see the amount of spray volume that's in driftable fines is cut by about 50%. Next slide. Now going into some problems. Here's some problems with nozzles and DRAs, some potential problems. You can have certain DRAs, and these are usually the thickener type products, the polyacrylamides, the Gore type products. They can reduce the spray angle as the droplets exit the nozzles. Your spray pressure can be reduced, your spray angle can be reduced, and you can get poor control as a result of that. A lot of times you do have to crank the pressure up to try and move those patterns out. That's definitely something to worry about. This is usually not a problem with the oil emulsion DRAs because they're really not thickening the spray, and they're actually fairly small molecules, and so what they're doing is they're actually reducing the formation of driftable fines without making the droplets really, really big. And then another thing we've seen, certain DRAs, again, these are typically the polyacrylamides and the Gores. They can actually create a lot of driftable fines, more than you would expect if they're used with certain nozzles, especially the Venturi type nozzles. This can happen where instead of actually reducing the amount of driftable fines, you can actually increase the amount of driftable fines. So you need to be aware of that as well. Next slide. And then this is some stuff from dicamba technology. I did a lot of work with this. So we were looking at this. We knew dicamba was going to be an issue. We knew we needed to do a really good job with reducing spray drift. And so we were looking at the dicamba technology as it was coming to the market. on both soybeans and cotton. And one of the things you have to remember, large droplets contain most of the dicamba, but there's not very many droplets that are those very large droplets. And small droplets have very little dicamba, but there's lots of little droplets. And we needed to reduce the spray volume of driftable droplets. We were putting the dicamba with glyphosate, and glyphosate makes small droplets. And actually, in our testing, we could not reduce the amount of spray volume sufficiently with the nozzles we were using to get the desired drift reduction results with those type of DRAs by themselves. And so we actually needed to go to the polyacrylamides or the Gore type products. They were approved by EPA and the companies, and they were marketed, and then that's what we did. Next slide. But we knew there was a lot of droplets there. We were able to confirm there was a lot of small droplets that were there. And we think a lot of the problems we were having was small droplets getting off target and causing damage. And then we figured out that if we added an oil emulsion DRA adjuvant to the spray with the polyacrylamide or the Gore DRAs, if we use both of them, we were able to do a really good job. We were able to stay in a good place with the large DRAs, and we were able to prevent a lot of small droplets from forming with the oil emulsion DRAs. So we recommended using both. And that's what worked very well for the rest of the time. And then if and when we get dicamba back on soybeans and cotton, I suggest that you use both a polyacrylamide and a Gore or a Gore and add an oil emulsion DRA to it as well. Use two different types of DRAs. I think that will give you the best protection against spray drift. And so next slide. Does this go back to you, Johnny?
No, well, I think we're caught up here.
Oh, okay. So then one of the things I want to recommend to everybody is what should we use? What should we trust? We think you should use CPDA certified adjuvants. You can go to the CPDA website. There are a lot of CPDA certified adjuvants out there. There's almost 500 labels that recommend using CPDA certified adjuvants, and there's over 200 products that are CPDA certified adjuvants. We think that's where you should go. And we thank you for that. Next slide. And I will turn it.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Greg. Thank you for that great presentation from Bill and Greg and Johnny. Appreciate your time today. We do have time for questions. In the meantime, I'm going to throw up the QR code for our CEUs. So feel free to scan that so that you can get credit from CCAs. I'm going to move to the Q&A function here. First question um, are these guar and acrylamides approved as drift reduction adjuvants for spray drift point reduction? I believe that might be to Bill for the ESA mitigation.
Yes, thanks. Right now, what we've been seeing on labels is registrants are specifying specific adjuvants for their formulation. So I'm sorry, I don't know the actual categories they fall into, but the manufacturers are specifying those themselves. And that's probably the good organization to make those decisions.
One other question in regards to the ESA portion of the presentation. Uh, Bill, do you know where EPA ended up with the 2.5% by air and 0.3% by ground it would make sense using different products would have different use rates to achieve reduction of driftable fines.
Uh, all I know is the registrant sent in data and they came to some conclusion with the EPA as to the percent they needed to add to those formulations for the different aerial and ground.
Those
Next,
those are good rates for the oil emulsion DRAs.
next question for Johnny. Could you talk more about how DRAs can improve droplet size and deposition? Is there a rule of thumb to use here?
There's such a variation of them. What typically drives the oil emulsions oftentimes is a maximum that if you get over it, you'll start to get too many, mixing issues and it becomes very thick. But to answer the question, do we know what level it takes to reach a certain particle size? That varies quite a bit with the product and the formulation and the data they have behind it. So I don't think there's a good general answer there. Would you agree with that, Greg?
Yeah, yes, everything you said is correct. And my only add to that would be it's also affected by the nozzle that you're using. So,
Next question, speed of spray was mentioned in one of the slides. Can someone explain some differences there?
so that it's some, I don't have a good mechanism for it, but we have seen it and it's repeatable and it's real that it has to do with the formation of the droplets as they're coming out of the nozzle, but they'll actually come out of the nozzle with a greater velocity when you use some of these DRA adjuvants.
Next question, if oil-based DRAs should be put in last, what's the rule of thumb for polymer-based DRAs and when do you put them in?
So my interpretation of that is that usually those products are not going out straight. I mean, there are some people doing right-of-way applications, things like that, which would use a straight product. But most of the products that are used that are either gore or polyacrylamide are mixed with AMS or mixed with some other thing. They're a combination type product. And so they need to go in when the other part of their makeup would go into the spray mix. So like if it was AMS, probably go in very early, and if it's something else, it might go in later. So
Yeah, to add to that, I've seen quite a few of them where it goes in first. I've seen quite a few where it goes in last. So that's something that's very dependent on the manufacturer. I think the polyacrylamides that are pre-swelled, so to speak, that are already sort of blended out, they're much more forgiving in that. But the concentrates, you'll often run into them having to go in first. Your goal is to get them swelled before you start adding other materials that compete for the water.
So a little bit of a broader question for Greg. How do we know what the best nozzle and DRA combination for use is?
so there isn't one, and it depends. So what I would say is for things that are systemic or are soil applied, um, then you can go to the big droplets. You're going to sacrifice some coverage, and you can use big nozzles, DRAs, things like that. For the contact type products, you're going to want to have better coverage, and so you're going to want to have um, a more reasonable size nozzle, and the you're going to want a DRA that's very forgiving. So it depends on what you're doing. Are you doing something systemic? Or are you doing something contact? That will make a thing there, but you need to you need to visit with people to figure out the best way to go. And the labels will have a lot of that information on it. It'll say use coarse sprays, or it'll say use ultra coarse sprays, or I'll use medium sprays, things like that. So there are some things on the label that can help you.
Uh, Greg, you talked about how spray charts are based upon water and not pesticides. How much of the spray is lost without a drift reduction adjuvant?
It depends on what it is. For example, if you have something like glyphosate or glufosinate that makes a lot of fines, you can lose a lot. And then with some of the other things, you may not lose as much as water. And then I'm going to throw this on there, and I don't want to, but I need to. It depends on where you are. If you're in the mid-south, you're not going to have a lot of evaporation and things like that usually. And then if you're in, say, western Kansas, western Nebraska, you're spraying in a desert, and things are going to evaporate very quickly. So I hope that answered the question. And then if it didn't, let's ask it again.
Next question. You mentioned increasing pressure to drive the spray solution into the canopy. How often is this happening? And is there a percentage of performance complaints coming from this?
So I don't know about the performance complaints, but I know this was a problem all along from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Hopefully, we've educated people a little bit that it's less of a problem now, but it probably still is a problem. It cranking up the pressure um, can help with coverage if things land. But if you're creating droplets that aren't going to land, you're not solving anything.
Yeah. You also had a slide about the spray tips and how they have improved performance with deposition aids by up to 50%. Why aren't growers using DRAs on every acre?
I I think they're just not aware of it. When you look at farming, um, the farmers got so much going on and they have to keep track of so many things. I actually think it that the you guys that are here need to help the farmer make good choices. And that's why we're presenting this material, is that so you guys can help the farmer make good choices.
Yeah, I
And
think there's a general lack of knowledge among a lot of growers that these things have a direct impact on their efficacy. There's sometimes a tendency where and I'm just generalizing as retailers, when we oversell the perfect droplet, we never talk about what the perfect droplet does, which is dead weeds and bugs, and by the way, it drifts less. I think the more we educate and focus on that, you'll see that it begin to increase.
yeah, and I want to make this point as well. So I believe that there's a lot of acres that don't have these products being applied, but I do want to say on the other side, there is over 100 million acres that are being treated with these DRAs every year. And so we do have quite a bit of usage, but there's a lot of people that are not using it that should be.
The last question here was about dicamba and over-the-top use, and asking if we've heard anything about the chances for over-the-top dicamba being approved for spring of 2026. To my knowledge, that has not been approved yet, but EPA is still working on it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. We haven't heard anything. We've heard that they'll get it. We've heard they won't get it, but we've not heard anything that is um, confirmed.
All right. Well, thanks again to everyone for today's presentation. Thank you again to Winfield United for sponsoring the presentation. Just as a reminder, we will have our next webinar Thursday, February 12th. Sorry, pardon me, I changed the date, but not the day. So that will be Thursday, February 12th, ESA Technical Field Guide and how to comply using adjuvants as tools for ESA requirements. From our friends at CPDA and here at ARA, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'll put the QR code back up so you can scan that. But we want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days and have a healthy and safe week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for having me.